Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm Najwa. Today we are here again in channel The Integration. The Integration will bring you historians and public policy makers to discuss about public finance. We will analyze the evolution of Kharaj and public finance adaptation in contemporary world. Public finance is the study of role of government in the economy. It deals with government revenue and government expenditure. First, government revenue is acquired through taxation. There is various forms of taxes which is compulsory to be paid by all citizens, such as income tax, sales tax, and property tax. In addition to that, there are Islamic tax, which is zakat, jizyah, and Kharaj. Zakat is a tax levied on Muslims who have access to wealth. The rate is 2.5%. Even though it is a form of taxation, it is also a religious obligation for Muslims. Jizyah is a yearly taxation imposed on non-Muslim of Islamic State. With that, they receive protection by the Muslim ruler and show their loyalty to Muslim state.
Kharaj is an Islamic tax on agricultural land and its crop. It was imposed on land owned by non-Muslim, whereas Muslim owners pay ush, which is a religious tax on land. Other than that, ush is also 10% tax imposed on merchandise. Nowadays, government also raise funds through the issuance of bonds and use the proceeds for expenditure.
Source of revenues mentioned before are then used as government expenditure. Expenditure focus on welfare of nation and the people. Islamic State in the past make a budgeting of expenditure based on available fund that they have in hands. Now, budgeting is almost always done based on planning. Most of the time, the spending comes first before the revenues. To fund the shortage, government usually take on debt. Too much debt is actually unsustainable for economic development.
When we look into the history in Islam, this public finance exists since Prophet Muhammad himself. Medina as a legal state governed all aspects, including financial operation. The Islamic teaching is spread widely. There were few wars and land was conquered by Muslims. Those belonging left by losing parties became ghanimah for the soldiers. After the Prophet died, Khalifah Abu Bakr continued. He fought against those who refused to pay zakat to the state as the central authority. Next, Khalifah Umar introduced Kharaj as a new form of tax because he knew that government lacked of fund. In addition, Umar recontextualized policy of ghanimah. He then established Baitul Mal as an institution for public finance. Khalifah Osman focused on capital expenditure by building the irrigation road and formed a policy of peace trade. The caliphs coming after that, they were having advisors in this area of public finance. If we go before Prophet Muhammad's time, we also have Prophet Yusuf, who interpreted the king's dream. It became a guide for Egypt rulers to prepare budget for the country during good season and drought season.
In Western world, English people had legislation 1692, which became the basis of the 18th century taxation in England. On the other hand, in France, Henry IV established two commissions in 1599 and 1604 to allow getting revenue from office holders that was called prolate tax. Western thought on public finance is more prominent during Adam Smith onwards. Here we go, let's watch an interview with a well-known historian, Miss Aina Safia. So there are few Islamic scholars that contribute to the Kharaj and public finance. Can you tell more on details about them and what's their contributions?
So for me, there are a few spectacular scholars which are Abu Yusuf, Abu Ubay and Ibn Hazim. Abu Yusuf is famous for his book Kitab al-Kharaj. So he determined the agricultural tax or Kharaj. When Abu Yusuf imposed Kharaj, he did in accordance with the Ummah al-Khattab policy. So the actual concept of Kharaj has existed from the present age. This is because Umar did not split the countries of Sham and Iraq as Islam domain was already large. Despite the opposition of some of the Prophet companion, they eventually conducted ijtihad by ijma to continue allow the land to be administered and picked by the Kharaj owners. So next is Abu Ubaid. He is a renowned hadith and fiqh scholar. On this topic, Kitab al-Amwal is one of the well-known kitab written by him. So what he did is he prioritized the concept of private property. According to the Abu Ubaid, the legality of faith is tax based on those who refuse to convert to Islam based on the Rasulullah offers to the opponents of Islam. Next is revenue from jizya, which means tax paid by the non-Muslim for the compensation of socio-economic facility, welfare services, securities, that they receive at the Islamic State. Although jizya is obligatory, Abu Ubaid also addressed that the agreement about who will be forced to pay the jizya, stating that only men are required to pay. Women, elderly, children, they are not required to pay because they do not have the capability to pay as they do not work, which means they don't have income. Lastly is revenue from Kharaj or land tax collected from the non-Muslim in the Muslim countries. To figure out the Kharaj rate, Abu Ubaid looked at the word of Umar al-Khattab, who calculated the Kharaj rate depending on the size of the land and the sort of business type. For Ibn Hazm, one of them is zakat. Human experience has shown that charity cannot be relied on the better property, and that this strategy is useless due to its lack of effectiveness as therapeutic measure, because the religious requirement does not entail any payment compulsion. The state should establish and collect a tax, which is zakat. Lastly is basic needs and poverty. Ibn Hazm identified 4 types of basic needs that needed for the human being, which is drink, food, living, shelter, and clothes. It's not only wealthy people who should only help with the poverty through the charity, but also the government itself. Ibn Hazm mentioned that in any country, the rich are responsible for the poor. The government may force payment if the zakah were insufficient to meet the needs of the poor. With this, the poor claim to reach riches extended beyond the scope of zakah, and if the zakah was insufficient to meet the poor's requirement, the public authority might need to obtain extra funds after the zakah has been paid. Yeah, that's all for me.
Do you think their contributions still valid to these days?
I would say there are things that from the contribution of the scholars can be used to these days and some cannot. For example, Ibn Hazm under supplementary tax, there in Malaysia there is like FST, sales tax, which are single stage tax imposed on product manufacturers and produced locally, and on taxable goods imported into Malaysia, and service tax, consumption tax that imposed on the taxable services provided in Malaysia by a registered service provider carrying out their business. For sales tax, government collects tax at manufacturer levels, only then forward to the wholesaler, then to the retailer, and up to consumer, where element of sales tax embedded in the price paid by the consumer itself. And for the service tax, government collect tax when service provide to business and consumer. However, jizya tax, I don't think it's available anymore. The practice of collecting any special tax from the non-Muslim came to a complete end with the annihilation of the Ottoman Caliphate after the end of the First World War. No Islamic country, including the Islamic Republic of Iran, currently engaged in the practice. I am free. If this tax is still available up to this day, it will be handled under corrupted leader and causing war between the non-Muslims and the Muslims itself. So I think that's all for me. I think that's my answer.
What a great explanation from Miss Aina Safia. Now we know the contribution of Islamic scholars. Next, I bring you to another historian, Miss Diana. How about the Western contribution to Kharaj in public finance? Perhaps you may briefly explain about this.
Thank you, Ms. Najwa, for the question. Okay, on land tax, Adam Smith addressed there are two types of taxation of land, which are the rent of land and the ground rents. Smith emphasized in his discussion of taxes on land that such a tax might be imposed either according to a schedule that is unchanged or that had been modified on a regular basis. In Smith's discussion, he observes that a tax on homes is a mix of a tax on structures, which means handed on to building occupants, and ground rents tax, which is collected by the landowner. It shows that Smith considered land value to be an excellent tax basis. Adam Smith stated that ground rents and conventional land rentals are both types of money that the owner often receives without even any concerns or consideration of his own. The yearly production of society's labor and capital, the actual wealth and income of the great majority of people may be the same over such a tax as it used to be. Thus, ground rents and extended land rentals may be the forms of revenue that can be benefit from the introduction of a special tax. Meanwhile, in public finance, Adam Smith envisioned three separate functions for government, which are protection from foreign aggression, internal order, and supply of public goods. In addition, Smith considered the cause of justice as crucial to the maintenance of peace, safety, and commerce. Instead of the civil authority protecting property, he predicted that the impoverished the propertyless would attempt to grab riches and assets from the wealthy. As a result, the importance of this governmental obligation increases in direct relation to the amount of property. Smith mentioned that some items that bring large public financial advantage are not economically feasible to produce privately, and hence he considered the provision of what we now call public utilities as an important responsibility of the government. Aside from that, Smith was certain that these infrastructure projects would be self-sustaining. For example, tolls or other types of user charges could be used to pay the construction and maintenance.
What about Henry George's contribution?
Okay, sure. Next, I will explaining the Henry George's contribution on land tax and public finance. On land tax, Henry George's major objective was not to develop a better tax system, but to explain why a greater incidence of poverty followed the maturing of a new society and to provide a solution to this phenomenon. In land tax, the solution advocated by George was to repeal all taxes save one on land taxes. By doing so, it will make property more available to people who wish to utilize it effectively while rendering land speculation unproductive. He stated that everyone had equal rights to the value of property, which were appropriately acknowledged by the public collection of the rental value of an improved land from every landowner. In Henry George theorem, it involves smaller agglomerations such as retail complexes and commercial sub-centers, which are often constructed by private enterprise. These developers profit from rises in land values in order to pay the development expenditure. It also demonstrates that such opportunity cost of constructing a new area can be separated into two components, which are positive profit and marginal excess burden. Meanwhile, in public finance, there are three primary results about the public's financial difficulties. Firstly, the optimal output of a local public benefit must be extended to provide the marginal external cost. Secondly, if a local authority collects real estate taxes, the proceeds are included in the budgetary surplus. However, a portion of the overall pricing deviation exists and the two balance one another out. Thirdly, a crowded local public good causes price distortion, which should be factored into the marginal excess burden. It shows that in a medium-sized town, the use of the local public benefit is less crowded, resulting in a lower marginal excess profit. Henry George recommended a single tax on all land value, which would not only enhance society, but also create enough cash to meet all government expenditure. Part of his reasoning was that practically all of land's worth is derived from community rather than individual labor, and hence any growth in value is the consequence of the community rather than individual effort. public investment was introduced to improve access to roadways or utilities are examples of community-based activities, as are improvements in other publicly defined prerogatives such as zoning rules and the preservation of open or public space.
Now, let's move to current issue about public finance and Kharaj. We will hear explanation from Mr. Farhan, a great public policy maker in Malaysia. As we know, zakat and tax are two different systems that will apply in Malaysian economic system. Based on your findings, is there an issue regarding imposition of a zakat institution and tax system in Malaysian governance?
There are many differences between Kharaj tax and the conventional tax today. However, there are also some similarities or adaptation of the Kharaj tax mechanism that is applied in the conventional tax system. In the case of Malaysia, the similar feature of Kharaj system that was applied on the conventional land tax system is a type of taxable present because the Kharaj tax and the conventional tax are imposed on all individuals regardless of whether the individual or the group is Muslim or non-Muslim, poor or rich. Furthermore, both Kharaj or conventional land tax have tax laws that impose enforcement on those who are late in paying the tax or cannot pay it at all. In addition, both taxes also impose different tax rate on different location of land. For example, both Kharaj tax rate and the conventional land tax are determined based on the location of the land, whether the land is located in town or the countryside. In the case of land tax in Malaysia, the tax rate on the urban land is charged at RM6 per 100 square meters, subject to a minimum of RM30 per lot. While the tax rate on the rural area, the land is charged at RM1 per 100 square meter, subject to a minimum of RM10 per lot.
Tax evasion is one of the problems faced by many countries in the world. Can you explain what are the factors that influence people to evade tax?
Zakah, taxes and tariffs are the primary source of revenue for Islamic nations, especially in Malaysia, because zakah resources can only be utilized for specific and restricted purpose only. Therefore, the Malaysian government is allowed to impose taxes. Talking about the issues regarding the imposition of these two systems, the fiscal system of the majority Muslim countries treat taxes as more important than zakah because the taxation system become an integral part of the fiscal system, while zakah is only regarded as a voluntary institution in majority Muslim countries. For instance, there is no correlation found between these two systems in the case of Malaysia because the only connection between zakah and the nation's fiscal management is the provision in the tax system that allows zakah payer to get a tax rebate on the amount paid as a zakah. And on the other hand, the zakah system has no significant place in Malaysia's budgetary framework because it is seen primarily as a religious activity, while tax management is viewed as a routine obligation. Furthermore, according to the Malaysia's federal constitution, religion affairs are considered as a state matters rather than federal matters under this constitution. Thus, the federal government handles all areas of national budgetary management in Malaysia, but the whole part of zakah administration are managed separately by their respective of Majlis Agama Islam Negeri.
Can you explain the adaptation of Kharaj mechanism on Malaysia's tax system? Is there any similarity between Kharaj and conventional land tax in Malaysia?
Talking about the issue of tax evasion, there is a study done about how tax authorities' effective administration can affect taxpayers' compliance behavior. According to study, the government and tax authorities were the main parties responsible for maintaining an effective tax administration to reduce the tax evasion. A study carried out by Richardson in 2008 found that the government have a significant relationship in determining the tax evasion. The study found that the lack of trust in constitution due to bad reputations and credibility of the tax authorities can have significant influence on people to evade tax. Furthermore, another factor that causes tax evasion behavior is the complexity of the tax system among the government agencies. For instance, tax complexity is determined by three factors: the complexity of the tax computation, the record-keeping requirement, and the presence of uncertainties in the tax system.
Now we will interview a well-known researcher in this area of public finance, Ms. Fargayana. Tax evasion can be related to the issue of tax being burdensome. Thus, what are some integrated approach which could be taken to reduce this tax burden? What about the complication in documentation of taxes?
To make tax less burdening, tax exemptions are given for some purchases of goods and services. In Malaysia, the categories of goods and services associated with tax exemptions include those which are crucial to the mankind. For instance, cereals, coffee and tea, live animals, fish, seafood, eggs, meat and spices. Similarly, books, magazines, newspapers, and journals are important sources of information, and in today's era of information, most people seek these mediums. Thus, with these tax exemptions, most people are able to get their most important needs without the burden of taxes, because tax shall not be burdensome until it affects people's ability to provide for their own selves. In addition to that, tax rates should be made as low as possible based on the budgeted expenditure. This is also proposed by Ibn Khaldun and Adam Smith based on the justification that high taxes would discourage people from doing businesses. Consequently, tax revenues received will be significantly low. We can look at this from the consumer side too. The higher the tax is, the higher the tax burden being transferred to them, and hence, this would discourage them from consuming the goods and services. Consequently, not only the tax revenues will be low, but the consumption level in the economy would be low too. And this will affect the whole economy's output. Also, income tax rates must be revised and be based on people's respective income. Abu Yusuf supported the ability to pay tax system. People should only be taxed on their surplus of income, meaning they should be able to spend on their basic necessities sufficiently. Moreover, they need to feel like their efforts to gain money are worth it. The government should also take into consideration the number of people in each household. Those who are barely surviving with their current income shall be exempted from paying taxes, as suggested by Abu Ubaid, where while tax rates can never be increased, it must be reduced if one is not able to pay.
What about the issue of zakat collection and distribution?
To ensure better documentation of tax revenues, we can apply the Fit for Purpose Land Administration (FFPLA), which currently exists specifically for land taxes. The FFPLA concepts that the systems to administer land are to be designed with the focus of fulfilling the need of tenure security for all in a relatively short time and at a relatively low cost. Abu Yusuf himself proposed the tax administration to be centralized. With this, the registration for land would be easier and low cost, thus encouraging people to become landowners and for landowners to officialize their ownerships. Thus, land taxes to be collected would increase, and meanwhile, the landowners receive benefits of less complex work and low cost of legal process. And this, of course, would be applied for other taxes too. In addition, the less complex work and low cost of legal process should also be applied on the refund of taxes. Oftentimes, people don't claim their tax refunds due to the complicated process. They need to keep their physical receipts on their own, collect them, and arrange them in one document before submitting them to the authorities. So, it would be better if there is a system which keeps track of their purchases, which are eligible for tax refunds as soon as the purchases are made. The state should be given more power when it comes to the collection of zakat. During the Prophet's time, zakat which was collected in an area will wholly be distributed in that area too. But in many cases nowadays, many people who are eligible for zakat do not receive them because of the complex documentation process and because of their pride, understandably. Thus, the state should have the power to delegate the authority to persons in charge of every community. The rationale behind this suggestion is that people who live together in a small community are more likely to be closer and more comfortable to each other. So the persons in charge can recognize the eligible recipients easier as they can see their living conditions firsthand. And this would save the eligible recipients from being embarrassed to apply for zakat on their own. Also, the documentation process must be made less complex. The eligible recipients should not have to contemplate if the process is worth going through. Thus, the authorities must be up to date with everyone's data and have an efficient system to track those who are eligible while also observing their current states through the persons in charge.
The government is raising funds through issuing bonds. What do you think is the issue here? And what do you think the government is supposed to do? How shall the government manage their expenditure?
Funding through too much debt is unsustainable as it puts constraints on future expenditure and it also unfairly puts burden on the later generation to repay them. World Bank estimated that 12.54% of expenses Malaysian government is used to pay the interest. Hence, the government needs to start looking for other alternatives of raising funds apart from taking loans. The government must make thorough efforts to budget their revenues and expenditures to ensure no shortage nor surplus in their financing, or at least to minimize them as much as possible. Indeed, according to Ibn Khaldun, extravagant spending by the government is extremely discouraged. Meanwhile, in the story of Prophet Yusuf, it emphasizes on the importance of a government to be ready in facing the difficulties or economic downturn to avoid having so much budget deficit. So, the government should seek help from experts to forecast the upcoming trend of the economy or calamity and make sure the revenue of the government is well allocated for the expenditure both in good years and the opposite. Yet, it must be reminded that things do not always go as planned, and so there must be flexibility allowed. In these cases, taking on debts is appropriate.
Finally, we come to the end of this episode. Indeed, we have seen a very intriguing discussion about the evolution of Kharaj and public finance adaptation in contemporary world. Thank you so much for watching the integration until the end. Stay tuned for more updates. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.